Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our public information meeting. We'll just give it a minute so other folks that are coming into the meeting, we'll let them settle in just for a minute, and then we'll get going. All right. All right. Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to our public information meeting number 2. This is our second public information meeting. This builds on the first information meeting that we had. This is really a reflection of the feedback that was provided as part of the first public information meeting. The committee members have met and they've arrived at a revised proposal of an option to solicit additional feedback from the community. So once again, welcome to the public information meeting number 2 tonight. This session is being recorded and will be posted on our school planning website after this meeting. So welcome. My name is Branko Vidovic. I'm the Senior Manager of Planning Services. We also have the Director of Education on tonight, Mr. John Klein. We also have the trustee for the area, Trustee Janet O'Hurtanota, and we have also facility staff Ryan Merrick, who is the Chief Operations Sustainability Officer, and Dylan Gunasekera, the Manager of Planning Services. We also have additional resources tonight. So let's get going and we'll just jump right into it. At this time, I'd like to pass it off to Director Klein to start us off with the land acknowledgement. Director Klein.
Thank you very much, Branko, and welcome everybody this evening on another winter evening. So we'll begin with what has become a custom at our board and all other boards in the province of Ontario, and that's an opportunity to honor the land and territory. Halton, as we know it today, is rich in the history and modern traditions of many First Nations and the Métis. From the lands of the Anishinaabe to the Attawaddaron and the Haudenosaunee and the Métis, these lands surrounding the Great Lakes are steeped in Indigenous history. As we gather today, wherever we are, on these treaty lands, our Catholic social teachings call us all in solidarity with our Indigenous brothers and sisters to honor and respect the 4 directions: lands, waters, plants, animals, and ancestors that walk before us. All these wonderful elements of creation exist, gifted to us by our Creator God. We acknowledge and thank the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation for being stewards of this traditional territory.
Thank you, Director Klein. And for the prayer, I'd like to pass it over to Trustee Janet O'Hurtanota.
Thank you very much. Make the sign of our faith, name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Heavenly Father, we come to you today asking for your guidance, wisdom, and support as we begin this meeting. Help us to engage in meaningful discussion. Allow us to grow closer as a group and nurture the bonds of community. Fill us with your grace, Lord God, as we make decisions that might affect the students, staff, faculty, and friends of Halton Catholic District School Board, and continue to remind us all that we do here today, all that we accomplish is for the pursuit of truth, for the greater glory of you, and for the service of humanity. We ask these things in your name. Amen. In the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit.
Thank you, Trustee O'Hurtanota. So getting right into it. So the agenda for tonight, just to ensure that the screen is to the maximum width possible, I will be turning off my camera so it allows full compatibility in terms of display on the screen. So the agenda for tonight is to really go over the school boundary review process, The School Boundary Review Committee that's been established as part of this review, why a school boundary review is needed. We're also going to go over the timeline where we've been and what's gotten us to this point and what the next steps are. Following that, we'll look over the public information meeting number 1 feedback results. And then after that, we will look at the preferred boundary option BE6, which is really building off the feedback that was received from public information meeting number 1. Following that, we will have a question period, and then we'll do next step. And for the question period, you will notice in your teams at the top section of the application, there is a Q&A section. So when you click the Q&A section, you can put your questions in there. It will be monitored by our Andrea Swindon. She's the Senior Manager of Communication Services. So please feel free to have any questions and we will address them accordingly. And then we'll just move on to the next steps after that. The school boundary review process. What is a school boundary review process? It's a process to create and or alter school attendance areas of a school and or a program within the jurisdiction of the board. The process is guided by Board Policy I-29, School Boundary Review Process, and Board Procedure VI-88, School Boundary Review Process. This specific boundary review follows the standard review process. The process is really the establishment of the advisory school of the School Boundary Review Committee. As part of the standard process, there is a requirement of a minimum 3 School Boundary Review Committee meetings. And in terms of community solicitation for feedback, the requirement under the process is 1, but because there was a lot of feedback as part of the first public information meeting, we are having tonight our second public information session. Further, as part of the process, the School Boundary Review Committee arrives at a preferred accommodation plan for staff, and staff will consider the preferred accommodation plan to create a recommendation report to trustees and have them consider it for approval. In terms of the school boundary review criteria, so there's really 6 criteria when looking at boundary reviews. The goal is really optimizing the use of existing facilities, minimizing the use of portable classrooms wherever possible, to the extent possible, minimize school boundary adjustments over the long term, optimize the cost-effective use of transportation and maximize walking to school, ensure classroom organizations are sustainably sized to meet ministry requirements and a size appropriate to foster an ideal learning environment. And to the extent possible, give due consideration to the concept of a neighborhood and Catholic school community. All 6 criteria have been used in developing all the options that have been shared with the community. School Boundary Review Committee. So as mentioned earlier, as part of the process, a School Boundary Review Committee needed to be established. So these are the representatives from the school communities. There are a range of members here. There were substantial amount of meetings and discussions about what is really best for the Halton Hills community. So I'd like to thank the community representatives. They are really the eyes and ears of the community, and they've provided feedback to the committee as a whole and provided options for further feedback for the community. There's also board staff online tonight, and additional staff are actually on this meeting and are all here as a resource. So just to further clarify, board staff is only as a resource. The school committee members, the SBRC review committee, make the recommendations in terms of the options. The mandate of the committee. So the nature of the committee is advisory and is meant to represent the affected schools of the school boundary review process. Representatives are the official conduit for information between the committee and the community. The task of the committee is to review potential options and provide objective feedback that presents the interest of all involved parties. Decisions are made by consensus. However, in the event consensus cannot be reached, committee members, excluding staff, will be provided the option to vote on how to move forward. Throughout the process, selected accommodation plans are presented to the affected school communities, the public, to gather feedback, which is part of the purpose of tonight, is to gather feedback. The feedback is gathered from community consultations like we are doing tonight, and is reviewed by the committee, which informs the preferred accommodation plan to be presented to staff. Why is a school boundary review needed? The scope of the review. So in essence, the review needed to establish school boundaries for the new Georgetown West Catholic Elementary School. It involved a review of all school boundaries for Holy Cross, St. Bridget, St. Catherine of Alexandria, St. Francis of Assisi, and St. Joseph. To complete the review, with implementation starting to take effect in September 2026, which is when the anticipating opening is for Georgetown West Catholic Elementary School. So the Georgetown West Catholic Elementary School. So on April 2nd, 2024, the Ministry of Education announced capital funding for the new Georgetown West Catholic Elementary School through the 2023-2024 Capital Priorities Program. There's also a location map on the slide here. So it's located in Northwest Georgetown at Burton Boulevard and Atwood Avenue. The proposed school statistics, so the functional building capacity of the school, this would be the bricks and mortar of the building, is 527 pupil places. The portable capacity for the school site is 12 portables, which amounts to 276 pupil places, and the total site capacity, which is a combination of the brick and mortars, the functional building capacity, and the portable capacity, is 803 pupil places. There is a childcare center as part of this school. It's a 5-room, 88-space childcare center. So prior to the opening of the new school in September 2026, boundaries need to be established. Just also to note, Georgetown West Catholic Elementary School is not a replacement for Holy Cross Catholic Elementary School. As part of the school boundary review process, school and or program boundaries for Holy Cross will be established. So as mentioned earlier in the presentation, the review of boundaries for all elementary schools in Halton Hills. So enrollment at all existing elementary schools in Georgetown is projected to increase and exceed site capacity. There are planned and proposed major developments across Georgetown that will contribute to growth. Currently, the optional French immersion program is split between St. Catherine of Alexandria for grades 1 to 5 and St. Bridget for grades 6 to 8. And consideration of the optional French immersion program, grades 5 to 8, at St. Francis of Assisi. As a result of these accommodation issues, long-term boundaries and optional programming locations needed to be reviewed as part of this boundary review process. The timeline. So I'll just quickly recap this. I'm sure many on this meeting have already seen this, but this is just a tentative schedule. So I'll just quickly start from the beginning. So there was a staff report on September 3rd to the Board of Trustees, that followed by an action report on September 17, 2024 to establish the School Boundary Review Committee. From there, you will see a number of committee working meetings. I won't go through all the dates, but you could see it there. Following those sessions, there was a lot of discussion in terms of which options to select and present to the community for public feedback. There were 3 options selected for community feedback, and on January 15th, that was our first public meeting with the 3 options that the committee suggested. Following that meeting, there were 3 more committee working meetings to reflect on the feedback from the community, and which brings us tonight with the public meeting number 2, which is a reflection of the feedback from public meeting number 1 and discussions through the committee working meetings. So that's where we are tonight. Following that, there would be a community working meeting on May 1st. Following that would be the School Boundary Review Committee recommendation staff report sometime in May or June. Public delegations also in May and June, and the action report for the School Boundary Review recommendation would also be in May, June of this year, and the goal is to implement these boundaries, as mentioned earlier in the presentation, is September 2026. At this point, I'd like to hand it over to Dylan Gunasekera, the Manager of Planning Services, to go over the public information meeting number 1 feedback results. Dylan?
Thanks, Bronco. Okay, so I'm going to go over the results from the first public information meeting online survey. So just before we get to the results, I just want to have a quick refresher of the 3 options that were selected by the SBRC at that point. So the first public information meeting occurred at Christ the King on January 15th. So the first option that was presented was option B6. Option B6 had French immersion, the full 1 to 8 French immersion program at Holy Cross, with regular track boundary changes at most schools. What that also results is Holy Cross, with this option, will no longer have regular track programming. The next option that was presented was option E2A. This option had French immersion, the full grade 1 to 8 program at St. Catherine of Alexandria, with regular track boundary changes occurring at most of the other schools in order to accommodate that full 1 to 8 program. And then the final option presented at that meeting was option F2. So this option is similar to option E2 in that French immersion remained in the South. However, the full 1 to 8 program in this case was at St. Bridget. This also resulted in regular track boundary changes at most schools in order to accommodate that full 1 to 8 program at that school. Based on the online feedback survey that was provided to the community, this is the results that we saw. So we broke the results into 3 categories: all respondents, just the regular track respondents, and just the French immersion respondents. So if you look at the responses as a whole, we had 52% preferring option B6, which is in the orange here. And then for the regular track respondents, about 59% of those respondents preferred option B6. However, for the French immersion respondents, only 20% preferred option B6. The majority of French immersion respondents preferred option E2A, which is the option where the full 1 to 8 program would move to St. Catherine of Alexandria. So based on that, the committee met afterward to come up with the option that's being presented today, which is the current preferred boundary option, B6E. So if you look at the numbering, it is B6E would be a variation of the original B6 that was presented in January. What went into the development of this preferred option? So these are the considerations that went into that decision by the SBRC. From the community, we heard that there was a preference for Holy Cross being a grade 1 to 8 French immersion school, as you saw in the survey results. The SBRC wanted focus on the least disruptive option for the most number of families. They wanted Glen Williams to remain at St. Francis of Assisi instead of moving to Georgetown West. The committee wanted all of the Holy Cross boundaries staying together. What that means is in some of the options, there was the Delrex neighborhood, which was identified previously as Zone W75. That area would stay with the rest of the Holy Cross boundary and move to Georgetown West instead of moving to St. Francis of Assisi from Holy Cross. The committee also looked at transportation implications as well as legacy exceptions. So that's also referred to as grandfathering for both the regular track and French immersion program. The committee preferred providing regular track grade 8 students legacy exception eligibility for the 2026-2027 school year. So again, how did the committee arrive at the preferred option? The committee received comments and feedback from the community at the January 15th public information meeting in person. There was results from the first online feedback survey. The committee heard from the local school community. So this would be the Catholic school councils, as well as feedback from other parents in the community. In the working meetings, the committee looked at various options. There was also information shared by staff at the committee working meetings and discussions. And all of those together was considered by the committee when they arrived at this preferred option, which is B6E. So now let's get into the details of this option. So on the left here, we have the proposed regular track boundaries for option B6E. I'll go into it more in detail in the next slide, but I would want to highlight the changes for the French immersion program and extended French programs here. So currently, as Bronco mentioned, grade 1 to 5 French immersion is at St. Catherine of Alexandria, and then students would transfer over to St. Bridget for grades 6 to 8. What this option would see is the movement of the French immersion program from those two schools to Holy Cross Catholic Elementary School starting in 2028. The first year of the school reopening, we would have JK to grade 7 in 2028, 2029, and then grade 8 will be added the following year in 2029, 2030. And for the extended French program, right now, that program is designated for St. Francis of Assisi. However, that program classes would only run in that program if there are sufficient students to fill a class. To date, we haven't been able to run classes at St. Francis of Assisi due to the low number of registrations for this program. However, what we have done for this option is we added a buffer at Holy Cross after 2028 to accommodate that program if there is demand for that extended French program. So these are the regular track boundary changes for option B6E. On the left-hand side of the slide, that shows the status quo boundary maps, and then on the right is option B6E. So on the left-hand side, the area in the navy or dark blue shading is the boundary for St. Francis of Assisi. In the green shading is the boundary for Holy Cross. In the purple shading is the boundary for St. Bridget. In the salmon or red color is the boundary for St. Catherine of Alexandria. And on the on the left-hand side, you have the yellow boundary that is for St. Joseph Acton, and that extends further west. With this option, if you look at this area here, which is the rural areas northwest of Georgetown, that area currently goes to St. Francis of Assisi. Under this option, that area would now move to Georgetown West. This area, which is Glen Williams and the rural areas to the east of Georgetown, would stay at St. Francis. Holy Cross, which is in the blue border here, that would move in its entirety to Georgetown West. Looking at the south here, St. Catherine of Alexandria would see this area, V69, which is the urban area that is west of Mount Henry Road, move from St. Catherine of Alexandria to St. Bridget. And then we have this rural area, which is currently part of St. Catherine of Alexandria as well, which is identified as zone V79. That would also move to Georgetown West. We do provide some interactive mapping on our public information meeting number 2 webpage. So this was sent in the email communication that went out to the community with the meeting to this link. If on that page, when you scroll down to the middle, there is an interactive mapping tool where you can enter your address and search how you will be impacted by any of these proposed boundary changes and/or program changes. Option B6E would also see the reopening of Holy Cross in 2028. Once Holy Cross becomes vacant following the transfer of students out of the facility, the board is planning to undertake renovation work to improve the condition of the facility, pending the approval from the Board of Trustees. Once renovation work is complete, the school is expected to open to students. Based on option B6E, the school will open as a single-track French immersion school in September 2028, or when the renovation is complete. So what we mean by single-track French immersion school is the school will only offer French immersion programming, and there won't be any regular track English programming offered at that school. This option would also introduce regular track legacy exceptions to students. So again, this is on the left here, we have the status quo boundaries, and on the right here is the new boundaries. So if I go by area, so this area right now is at St. Francis of Assisi. For 2026-2027, when Georgetown West opens, the grade 8 students in this area will remain at St. Francis of Assisi to allow them to graduate with their peers in grade 8. We also have V79, which moves from St. Catherine of Alexandria to Georgetown West. In 2026-2027, the grade 8 students in this area would remain at St. Catherine of Alexandria until they graduate. The area here in V69, those students will also stay at St. Catherine of Alexandria until they graduate grade 8. And then for this area in the blue border, which is the Holy Cross boundary, because Holy Cross will be temporarily closed for renovations, all the students in that school will have to transfer over to Georgetown West in 2026-2027. As part of this option, we will also be offering French immersion legacy exceptions. So this column here shows the for the 2024-2025 school year, where each of those cohorts are. So students who are currently in grade 4 to grade 8 at either St. Catherine of Alexandria or St. Bridget will not be impacted by this boundary or program change. Those students would start out in St. Catherine of Alexandria and then transfer over to St. Bridget for grade 6, and then remain at St. Bridget all the way through until they graduate. The cohort highlighted in the beige, so that would be the current grade 3 cohort. That cohort will stay at St. Catherine of Alexandria until grade 6. So that means we are adding a grade 6 to St. Catherine in 2027. And then for 2028, those students will move over to Holy Cross and continue until they graduate. And finally, the current grade 1 and 2 cohorts, those cohorts will remain at St. Catherine until 2028, when they would transfer over to Holy Cross. Any new students who, so any new cohorts for grade 1 from 2025 onward would also then transfer to Holy Cross in 2028. Okay, so let's look at each of the boundaries more in detail and then look at what these changes would mean from an enrollment perspective. So starting out with Holy Cross, on the left here, we have the boundary for that school. So this would be all of the French immersion, Holy Cross would have all of the Georgetown French immersion feeders. So students from St. Joseph Acton, Georgetown West, St. Francis of Assisi, St. Catherine of Alexandria, St. Bridget, as well as any future schools in Halton Hills would have French immersion at Holy Cross. On the right, we have enrollment projection graphs. Maybe before I get going on these, I'll just quickly explain how to read these. So each of the bars in these graphs represents the program enrollment at that school. So the blue bars represent the regular track program enrollment. The orange bars represent the French immersion program enrollment. I'm just going to go to the next slide here just to show the other colors. We have the gray bars. These represent the enrollment from future development in the Vision Georgetown area. Scroll over one more. And then we have in purple the enrollment from the extended French program that we're projecting. And then you might, there's some other colors as well. This green, for example, is enrollment from the special education program. In each of the graphs, you'll also see a dark gray dashed line, and then above that, a light gray dashed line. So the dark gray dashed line represents the functional building capacity of the school. So that would be the bricks and mortar capacity of the school building. And then the light gray dashed line represents the total site capacity of the school. So this would be the sum of the capacity from the building plus the maximum number of portables that you can put on site at that facility. I'm just going to go back to Holy Cross. So if you look at Holy Cross's enrollment, the status quo enrollment, you'll notice that the school's enrollment increases long-term beyond the building capacity, which is in the gray line here. This facility also has some site restrictions, which prevents the board from adding portables on site. And that's why you'll see just this, the building capacity line at that school. So when the enrollment exceeds building capacity, that means we have an accommodation issue at that school where we cannot accommodate these students in the facility. Once the boundary changes are made for option B, under option B6E, the enrollment, you'll notice in 2026, 2027, that's when the school is temporarily closed, and then it would reopen in 2028 with the French immersion program filling those spaces. And then also we have this dashed purple bar, which represents the extended French program enrollments that we could accommodate at this facility if there is sufficient students to fill classes. Now moving on to the next school, which is St. Bridget. St. Bridget, currently enrollment will decline slightly. However, it will increase rapidly as development gets going in the Vision Georgetown secondary plan area. Oops, just gonna go back here. Excluding Vision Georgetown, enrollment does decline and then stabilize within building capacity. The reason we have these Vision Georgetown population in a different color is because long-term we do have 2 new elementary school facilities designated within the secondary plan area that would be the home for these students long-term. And these would just be a temporary solution until we get those new facilities. So with this boundary change, again, this would the change for the regular track boundary for St. Bridget would be we would add this area B69 from St. Catherine, and then we'd also remove the French immersion program, which will notice the decline in the orange bars. What that does result in is that the long-term enrollment at that school being slightly below or near the building capacity of that facility. So now St. Catherine of Alexandria, their enrollment is currently between building capacity and site capacity, which means we have portables on site. Long term, however, we do see increases in the population in this area due to residential development. That would impact both the regular track program and the French immersion program. What that results in is the long-term population of that school being over the site capacity. With this change for option B6E, enrollment at that school does decline and then slowly increases to near slightly above building capacity long-term, which we should be able to, which we would be able to accommodate on site. Now, St. Francis of Assisi, this school does have limited space for portables. As you'll notice, the enrollment does increase at that school, and it is projected to exceed site capacity in 2026 and continue to be above site capacity long term. With this change in boundaries and moving this area to Georgetown West, enrollment at that school does decline, and it is slightly above building capacity, but what that would mean is the school would still require portables long term. However, it is, again, within the site capacity. St. Joseph Acton serves the Acton area, rural parts east of Acton, as well as rural North Milton. Enrollment at this school is stable long-term within building capacity, and with option B6E, it remains stable long-term within building capacity. And finally, we have Georgetown West Catholic Elementary School. Right now, the school isn't there yet, so there's no enrollment at that school. With this option, with the introduction of regular track programming in 2026 and the boundary changes, which would bring in parts of St. Francis, Holy Cross in its entirety, and then a part of St. Catherine, enrollment does, it'll be near building capacity, and then it is, we will need portables at that school long-term with these boundaries. However, unlike some of the other schools, there is space to accommodate portables at this site. So that is an overview of the new option that we're presenting today, as well as the rationale behind why this option was chosen by the School Boundary Review Committee. So now I'll hand it off to our Senior Manager of Communications to go over the next section.
Thanks, Dylan. I'm going to get to some of the questions that were submitted through the online question form in a second. I want to remind everybody who's watching right now that there is a Q&A that you can submit questions on. So if you toggle up above on the toolbar, you'll see in the top right-hand corner of your screen, you should see what looks like a speech bubble with a question mark. That's the Q&A. You can select Ask a Question on it and then type your question in and press send, and we will be able to see it on this side. So feel free, as we're going through the questions, if you don't hear your question asked, feel free to submit it and we'll get to that as soon as we've gone through the questions that were submitted through the online form. I do want to thank everybody who did take the time to go through all the materials that we sent. There was a lot there, and clearly you all did. And there were a number of questions submitted. We've kind of pulled them together according to some themes, and we have some staff online who can help respond to some of these questions. So the first one I'm going to get to, and I know, Dylan, I know you did address this during your presentation, but perhaps you can reiterate or maybe go over it again. We had a couple of questions around the options presented previously. Glenn Williams transferred to Georgetown West Catholic Elementary School. Why is this area no longer being directed to the new school?
Sure, thanks for that question. So based on the public feedback we received at the first meeting, as well as discussions at the school boundary review committee meetings afterward, it was expressed that this area wanted to stay at St. Francis of Assisi instead of moving to Georgetown West. And based on those discussions, the SBRC did opt to have this reflected in their preferred option. So that would be for that area to be at St. Francis of Assisi long term. Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks, Dylan. We also had a number of questions related to French immersion, the program, and we have with us on the call, I'm just going to make sure, we have our Superintendent of Curriculum Services, Superintendent Jeff Kroll. He's on the call, and he may be able to turn on his camera. So Jeff, we had a couple of questions. One of them was, I'll read it out. Will having a single track French immersion school result in the students not having field trips or extracurricular activities?
No, I don't see that having any effect on the student experience. I can tell you that for the last few years, the ministry has provided specialized French immersion or funding for French immersion students to participate in different what they call cultural experiences, including things like field trips and guest speakers. I can't guarantee that money will be there next year, but I don't see any reason why students in a single track French immersion school wouldn't have the same opportunities as other students.
Perfect. Great, Jeff. There's also another question related to French immersion. Will the committee consider another option that keeps the French immersion program in the South?
That one I'll have to refer back to the committee.
That's probably not quite for you. That's probably more for the somebody, I don't know, maybe Ryan. We have our chief officer of sustainability, and Ryan Merrick. Maybe we have, yeah, go ahead, Ryan, if you want to take that one.
Folks. Yeah, so if we go back and rewind the clock back to community consultation meeting number 1, we actually had 2 options that looked at having French immersion solely at one school in the South. So we did look at those in the past. There was preference to having it housed solely at Holy Cross, and that's why the committee went to that direction in future meetings. But we do have feedback, and actually in the slides earlier, Dylan showed some of that feedback. So and the community responses favoring it at Holy Cross. So we have looked at that in the past, and it wasn't the preferential option based on community feedback.
Thanks, Ryan. That's great. And actually, Ryan, while I have you here, there are a couple of questions related to construction. So when is construction at Georgetown West Catholic Elementary School expected to begin? And is it still on track to open for September 2026?
Yeah, thanks. That's a really good question. So we are still on track at this point. With that said, we don't have our building permit yet. So in the construction of a school, typically the hardest part of getting a school built is getting our site plan and our building permit approved through the local municipality. So we're in that process right now. We're hoping to start construction in the next, hopefully before the fall. We need about 12 months to construct the construction time in order to open the school for fall 2026. So we have a little bit of time still on our side. But we don't have our permit yet, so we're still working through that process. If things were to be delayed, we would just have to shift the implementation of this plan, and that would be communicated out through the channels. But we're not at that point yet, and we're still hopeful of a September 2026 opening for the new school, the Georgetown West school.
Thanks, Ryan. And another question here. If work at Holy Cross is not complete for 2028, where will the French immersion students be directed?
Yeah, so I guess this is referring to the renovation work at Holy Cross, and if that's not complete. again, we would have to, if it wasn't completed on time, we'd have to look at shifting it back and housing those students at their existing schools. Unfortunately for this one, it's a little bit more in our control. Getting a building permit for renovation work or even small addition work is much easier than getting a site plan and a building permit for new construction for a large new school facility. Further to that, we'd actually have, if we were doing any renovation work on the existing Holy Cross building, we wouldn't actually start that until September 2026 when all the students move out of it. So we have a year and a half to get our design done or building permits in place. So we have a lot more lead time on that. And frankly, in the current plan, we have 2 years to do the construction work as well. That's quite a bit of time to do renovation work as well. So we have a fairly comfortable schedule on the renovation side. But yeah, if it didn't fall into place, we'd have to look at a plan to kind of shift the move in back a little bit and then house those students at other schools, and probably their current schools where they would go in, say in September 2027.
Thanks, Ryan. We also had a couple of questions around the feedback. I know Dylan shared the feedback. He had a slide about this, and I'm just going to read the question. Was the response from public meeting number 1, so I think they mean the response from the survey that was sent out after the public meeting number 1, weighted to account for French immersion program? So I don't know.
I can answer that one, but
Sure.
it's if I'm not getting at the right question here, then please, whoever submitted it, send in your question again. But I believe they're getting at, do we add special weight to the French immersion responses? And we didn't provide any special weight to the French immersion responses, just like we didn't provide any special weighting to the English regular track responses as well. We actually looked at the raw data with the committee, where all responses were weighted equally. And then we also had a lot of write-in comments as well. But it's really up to the committee to look at how they're going to weight those responses and interpret them in order to come up with the best solution for the community. So we didn't provide any extra weighting to the French immersion responses. We also didn't provide any extra weighting to the English regular track responses. And further to that, we actually we don't provide any guidance to the group as how we weight those 6 criteria. So Bronco talked kind of right at the start today. We have 6 criteria of how we evaluate a boundary review or a boundary review option. We don't provide any guidance to them on that sense as well. It is kind of up to the committee to figure out how they're going to weight each of those criteria and each of the responses that come in from the community, and really come up with the best kind of mix of all of those feedback comments in the option.
Thanks, Ryan. There's another question that's related to this. It's along the same lines of the French immersion. I think I can probably respond to this one. It's how were parents in the French immersion program engaged in this boundary review? And the second part would be, can there be more targeted consultation before a decision is made? So I can explain, how we went about informing the community. We did send several emails to all parents and guardians with children attending an HCDSB elementary school in Halton Hills. So sent via direct communication right to the email. We also shared information on each of the school websites, and we provided messaging for the school principals to share in their weekly updates. So this approach was very targeted. We wanted to ensure that we were reaching the families that would be directly impacted by this review, and we wanted to make sure that everyone was aware of the review was happening and had an opportunity to provide feedback. So that speaks to how we targeted. I also should we should add, and I don't know if it was addressed specifically, but when Dylan or Bronco spoke to the School Boundary Review Committee, it does include a number of parents with children in the French immersion program. So their perspectives have certainly been an important part of the discussions that have taken place and have helped to ensure the unique considerations of the program, that they're reflected throughout the review process. So I hope that answers that question. And there were a couple more. I'm going to call on. So there are a couple of questions about cross boundary. So I live in an area that would be a boundary change, see a boundary change in 2026. My older child will be eligible to remain at their existing school for grade 8. Will my younger child in grade 4 have the option to remain at the same school? So I don't think our superintendent is on at this moment. Does anybody want to take this one? Dylan, do you want to take this question? Or Jeff, either one. I'm happy for anybody to respond to this.
Sure, I can try. And again, if I don't get this quite right, certainly feel free to reach out. So my understanding is you have a child who would want to remain at their school even though their boundaries changing.
So there is a legacy exception. So it
Yeah.
looks like this family has one child that would be in grade 8, so qualify for the legacy, but they also have a child in grade 4, and I think they would like them to remain at the same school.
Yeah, so we do have a cross-boundary process. It depends on whether the school is considered to be open or closed to cross-boundary applications. So planning services does basically models out which schools will be at or over capacity and designates those as closed schools. For schools that are under capacity, they're considered to be open for cross-boundary. So that'd be the first criteria. Then if the school's open for cross-boundary, there's an application form that goes to the family of school superintendent for Halton Hills, and those are sort of looked at on a case-by-case basis. So the short answer is not a yes or a no. It's a depends. It depends on the capacity of the school and the student population at that time. And then it also depends on sort of the specific reasons why a parent might want their child to attend the school cross-boundary.
Got it. Okay, that's very connected to another question. Will siblings of French immersion students who are not in the program be able to attend Holy Cross? And again, that's connected to the cross-boundary application process. And
yeah,
then
just to note to parents, sorry, Andrew, we don't have a sibling rule currently for French immersion. So if a sibling of a child in French immersion wants to attend that school, it is a cross boundary. It's not an automatic for a sibling.
Okay, perfect. Thank you for that, Jeff. And then we have a question around legacy exceptions. Another question. My child is currently in grade 6 French immersion. Will they need to move? So they're currently in grade 6 French immersion at St. Bridget. Will they need to move as part of the preferred option? Dylan, I see your camera on. Did you want to take that one?
Yeah, sure. I can respond to that one. If they're at grade 6 French immersion right now at St. Bridget, that would mean they would stay at St. Bridget until they graduate grade 8. So there would be no changes for that child.
Perfect. Thank you, Dylan. And we have a question around bell times. What time will be the start and end times for the new Georgetown West Catholic Elementary School? And will it be the same as the current Holy Cross Catholic Elementary School? And Bronco, do you want to respond to that?
Sure, I can take that one. It's really too soon to tell. Because Georgetown West will be opening in September 2026. Every year, late winter, early spring, HSTS, which is Halton Student Transportation Services, what they do is like a busing efficiency study. And as part of that process, they look at what's the optimal way to coordinate the buses, because a lot of the buses are shared. Like HSTS accounts for buses for both our board and the public board, the Halton District School Board. So as part of that process, in winter 2026, spring 2026, we'll have a better idea of what the school hours will be for when Georgetown West opens in September.
Thank you so much, Bronco. I think at this point we're done with the questions that have been submitted online. I don't see any questions through the Q&A, but you're welcome even after this meeting to continue to submit questions through the form that we sent you via email, and we will be creating an FAQ. And at this point, I'm just going to pass it over to our Chief Operations and Sustainability Officer, Ryan Merrick.
Thanks, Andrea. So I'll wrap up the last few slides here. I'm going to turn my camera off again so you get the bigger picture of the slides here. So just give me 1 second here. All right, so just looping us back into the timeline that Bronco reviewed earlier. We are at the in the red box there in the middle there at community consultation number 2 right now. So this review was initiated all the way back in September. We've had many meetings with our committees and the community to get to the point where we are at tonight. And we do still have some steps left to go, which I'll cover off on the next slides. But the dates are all here for you to digest. However, I will note that they are tentative. We have had to move some dates around for our past meetings, and the timeline is a little bit flexible going forward, but that's kind of the general overlay of the timeline you see right there. So maybe let's jump on to the next slide here. So again, the objective of tonight's meeting is to explain the preferred option as devised by the School Boundary Review Committee. And we definitely want your feedback on it. So the feedback survey is now open. I'll show you a QR code for it on the next slide as well. But the link to it is now open, and we want your feedback. All of that feedback will go on to our School Boundary Review Committee, and they'll review that in early May. The intent there is that they'll look at the feedback and try to find ways to incorporate that feedback into their refined proposed option. That option would then be submitted to staff, and staff will create a report that will bring forward to our Board of Trustees. The report will be presented to the Board of Trustees, hopefully in May, but it will be at a future board meeting. Once the report is presented to the Board of Trustees, there's another opportunity for the public to provide input, and those are called public delegations, which are essentially public presentations to the Board of Trustees. So there will be notices go out to community members, and they can provide a presentation to the Board of Trustees if they like. And then finally, at a subsequent board meeting, the Board of Trustees will vote on the proposed option and ultimately set up what the final catchments will be for the schools in Georgetown. Again, we're hoping to complete this by the end of the school year, but it may fall into the fall as well, depending on how some of the dates fall and what the feedback we get is, and the decision of the School Boundary Review Committee. But all of this is with the intent that we'll wrap up this process, possibly in this school year, hopefully in this school year, but it may fall into the fall as well. But that'll give us lots of time then next fall to communicate the changes out to the school community, and then as well as take in new registrations and have everything lined up for the opening of the new Georgetown West School in September 2026. And finally, on our last slide here, like I said, the feedback survey is now open. It will be open until April 17th at midnight. There's a QR code there, but if you can shoot it there if you like. But if not, it will go out in an email later on this week, and people will be able to submit feedback on the preferred option, which will then be considered by our review committee and incorporated into any future option changes. So with that concludes our presentation for tonight. Again, I want to really thank the School Boundary Review Committee's members. They've been through a lot of meetings this year, put in a lot of time, and had a lot of homework to do over the last 8 months or so. So they've put in a lot of work in this. So really thank them, and thank you folks as well for providing your input and making the option become refined and create a better option for our Georgetown community. So thank you, everyone, and have a great rest of your night.